It's lonely being a farmer because you're usually isolated, and not having a community to support you is really difficult.
The farming community is actually 3.5 times more likely to die from suicide than the general population. And that's just one small anecdote of how burdensome the system has made it to become a farmer. I'd love for you to talk about that rural revival, so to speak.
Yeah.
Do you see that happening?
Uh,
Cody, welcome to the Meat Mafia podcast, man. Pumped to have you on.
hey, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so we've been going back and forth for a little while now, and was just really excited to get you on because you have such a great thing going with the Grassroots Co-op, educating people more on just like where their food is coming from, the importance of quality food, and really just like in general, like what's happening with the food system. So love what you guys are doing. And I think a great place to start would just kind of be with your background, how you got into the Grassroots Co-op and what got you involved with farming in the first place.
Sure. Yeah. Well, great question. So my wife and I are both first generation farmers, so we didn't come into this as farmers. And about in 2007, we got inspired by some of the work that Joel Salatin was doing, a farmer out in Virginia, and had read the Omnivore's Dilemma, and saw we were looking for a way to make a living here in our rural part of Arkansas, which is where we live and farm now. And we were wanting to do something that felt impactful and meaningful to us. And so we cared about things like climate change and animal welfare and trying to contribute to our rural economy. And so we got inspired by a few really awesome farmers out there that are sort of leading the way, and tried to follow in their footsteps. And so we started a diversified livestock farm in 2007, and sort of bootstrapped that up over a couple of years, doing our own direct marketing to restaurants and individuals locally through buying clubs and farmers markets and those kind of things. And pretty quickly started to see that, gosh, there are some huge hurdles in trying to get a farm off the ground, especially if you're a first generation farmer, but just period. It's just difficult for farmers to operate outside of the commodity system.
Mm.
Uh, and we were committed to going direct to the customer because we wanted that relationship. We thought that was important to us, being able to actually pencil out a living doing this. But as we tried to do that, we had a lot of support from customers, but we had some really difficult challenges on the processing and aggregation side of things. We had to drive. It felt like we were always on the road, taking animals to get them harvested, going to pick them up. We were driving 3 or 4 hours away. And so we just started to really bump into the hurdles that come along with getting a farm business off the ground, and started to see just how broken our food system was and the gaps that existed. And so that led us to eventually, we became, we part of a community with some other farmers, and started to see, well, look, we're all experiencing these same problems. Are there some ways for us to work together and try to solve those problems? And so that's what led to, about 10 years ago. Actually, this month will be 10 years old. The co-op will be. We formed Grassroots Farmers Co-op and established that as basically a business that would help do the marketing sales aspect for the farmers and develop the supply chain that would connect so go out and find those customers, and then they were interested in the product, and then develop the supply chain that would connect the farmer and the consumer so that the animals could get from the farm to the customer's plate. And so we started that in 2014, and have been on that road ever since. So.
Wow. What an awesome journey, and congrats on the success with getting the co-op together. Like 10 years of running a co-op, I'm sure you've learned a ton.
Yes. I tell people I've learned most things the hard way twice. So,
Um,
yeah.
I'd love to hear a little bit more about the transition from going from, what you were doing before to becoming a first generation rancher, and just kind of some of those emotions and feelings as you're getting started. Because I'm sure, you're drinking out of a fire hose trying to figure out
Yeah.
how to get everything going. So I'd love to hear a little bit more context around that.
Yeah. So, when we got going with our farm, I didn't know anything I grew up in rural Arkansas. We had like a hobby garden and that kind of thing, but never raising livestock. And so, my background, I have a a degree in physics and I'm a math person, so I didn't like it was definitely new territory for me. My wife had more of a background of kind of homesteading and her family was a bit more I guess agrarian, than mine. And so it was definitely a lot of like a lot of hard lessons and also a lot of amazing mentorship. I mean, there's just we were, whenever I have a farmer reach or someone who's interested in getting into farming, reach out to me. I say go find mentors, go find people that you can spend some time on their farm, make sure you like doing it, find people that can help you figure out how to do this stuff. And so there's a lot of great resources now, more now than there were when we got started, but it was definitely a wild time. And really, I think what kept giving us like we would the the consumer side, that connection to the customer and the desire from the customer side of things for the product is really what, when we had hard times of trying to figure out, well, gosh, we can't find a processing plant, or we got a at one point we actually owned zero land when we started, so we were leasing land. And pretty quickly outgrew that. We had to move 30 miles away to a new farm, and that was a huge deal.
Mm.
And so it was very exciting, very like a very really wild ride, and certainly that encouragement from the customers that were so dedicated to us was really one of the core things that kept us really excited and motivated to keep moving forward. So.
Mm. How did you feel like your customers were connecting with you guys? Was it on the food quality side of things? Was it on the environmental aspects? Like, why were your customers initially coming to you guys?
Well, I would say initially it was just they wanted a connection to their farmer. And I think that sort of goes like at the core of that is they want to trust and know the people that are raising their food. They want to trust
Mm.
where their food comes from, and they want to support they wanted to support farmers in their backyard. And so and I would say that like as we've grown, especially with the co-op, we're selling nationally now. At the time we were selling just within 150 miles of our farm. And at this stage the customers that we get are really health motivated. And it's health and trust and where the food's coming from. And then a lot of customers often have had some sort of health challenge coming
Mm.
into it. It's sort of like a moment where it's like they have sort of a wake up where it's like, gosh, I got to change what I'm putting into my body, because that's one way I can help ensure that I stay as healthy as possible. And so or my family, I want to feed my family good food that I can trust. And then on top of that, there's things like, well, they care about farmers making a decent living. They care about the environmental benefits of the kind of farming that we do. They care about the animal welfare side. But in those early days, it was really, it was very it was just very. There were folks who would, we would meet face to face at the farmers market, and
Mm.
so it was just a really. They almost a lot of them became friends for and customers that we still have today. So
Wow.
yeah.
You mentioned earlier the competition against conventional food and just what's happening in the more industrialized parts of the food system. And I'd love to just get your take on what that actually looks like from someone who's bootstrapping a farm, bootstrapping a co-op, trying to get this small, more decentralized farming operation off the ground. What does that competition actually look and feel like?
Yeah. Well, I would say that it's I mean, we really, we feel like we offer such a different product than the commodity conventional market that it's not really the competition. It's more of just like, I worry about the country depending on a food system that's so centralized and so focused on, uh, maximizing the profit for like the executives of the company and the shareholders of the company over considering things like the environment, the health of the of the country, the resilience of our food system, as we saw in COVID. I mean, it's just been brought up a lot. When that system really broke down during COVID. I mean, there was one processing plant up in, I think it was maybe South Dakota, North Dakota area, that was processing like 5 to 10% of all the hogs, and that plant shut down. they couldn't, that was a absolute nightmare for the farmers, for the food system, for the employees there. And so we have such a centralized food system that that's focused on maximizing profit at the expense of everything else, that there's just it's very scary to me, and
Mm,
is something that I think is you see less and less farmers across the country. I mean, I think we're down to a place where we have, a little less than, 2% of the population is farming at this stage. And the average age of a farmer is about 60 years old. We're going to need more farmers. And I think it was less than maybe 10% or of the farmers are 35 or under. So very few folks getting into this. We've got to find a way to attract a new generation of farmers, and it's not going to be through conventional ag, because that's a model that's just you don't. It's hard to make it pencil out. You got to get really big if you want to compete, and it's just not a very fulfilling lifestyle for a lot of folks. So,
mm.
uh, yeah, there's a lot of reasons for concern there from my standpoint, and it's something that we're very motivated. When you think about the land across our country, I think it's like 40 to 45% of the land is farmland across the country. And to put, like, I think the national park is about, like, there's about 3% of the land across the country is in national parks. So farmers are caretakers of our land, and we need those good stewards out there. And so it's really important that we support a system that's not just trying to extract maximum profitability at the expense of everything else. So.
Mm. How much of the problems with the existing system are rooted in, because you're a first generation rancher or farmer coming from kind of the outside looking in, so
Yep.
you're able to actually like circumvent the education process that a lot of farmers go through, which
Yes.
to me feels a lot more like ingraining these farmers and preparing them to just be a part of the conventional system. So
Yep.
I'm encouraged by people like yourself and some other people that we've had on the show who have come in from an outsider's perspective and brought this fresh innovation into farming
Yep.
and are so passionate about changing the food system. But I do see this dichotomy between the system that is failing right now is just self-perpetuating. So like, can we get enough people aware of the fact that we kind of need outsiders and people who are like doing other things right now to start contributing?
Yeah, yeah, that's a really great point. And I think that, I mean, certainly the agricultural policy across the country does sort of push us towards big ag. It's heavily subsidized, and there's a push that direction. I think that the thing that inspires me the most is the power that consumers have to vote with their fork,
Hmm.
to be able to drive change in the food system. So I think that's, ultimately the thing that's going to drive all the change here is going to be consumers moving this direction. And so, I think that's where I look for the real, because if farmers have a market for this product, like, it's not easy to make a transition. If you're doing one type of farming, say you're raising chickens in chicken houses, and then you're going to move to a pasture poultry system, that's not easy.
Hmm.
And you likely have a lot of debt involved in the conventional poultry system, and making that transition is very, very difficult to do. But if there's a consumer demand for it, people will find a way to make that transition. And when going back to that point around a new generation of farmers, I mean, they're over the next 10 to 15 years, we're going to need a lot more farmers that come in to the picture here. And so hopefully a lot more of those farmers are thinking outside the box, and there's systems they can plug into, or opportunities they can plug into, that will be more in line with the regenerative agriculture system. And it's been kind of one of our goals with the co-op. We work with about 50 farms at this stage, and we've wanted to build a system where we could go out and help educate consumers, connect those consumers to farmers that are raising livestock in a regenerative way, and then make it easy for those farmers to get their product to those customers. And so that's ultimately what Grassroots does every day, is we go out and we're educating customers, We are supporting farmers, helping develop the infrastructure that's needed to help get the animals processed or get the product from the farm to the processor, and even training the farmers, helping the farmers get access to the infrastructure and resources they need to be able to grow and expand their farms. So, I think there's we've taken the approach of a collaborative approach where farmers working together can help sort of tackle some of these bigger, more gnarly food system issues than just one individual farm trying to go it alone. So,
What do you think the points are on the education side that are most important for the consumer to understand? Like when you guys think about education, what are you
yeah,
guys really trying to drive home with your message?
yeah. So, I think there's a couple of things that immediately come to mind. One is the nutrient density. We've had our meat tested, the in different ways, and I think there's a lot of interesting technology coming out that's going to help make that easier for consumers to digest and understand. But just the quality of the meat and the nutrient density of the meat being produced on a farm like the farms that are part of Grassroots is just so much higher and better. So the nutrient density side is one message that we really focus on. The lack of use of antibiotics and bleach in the water to soak the chickens in. So just being really transparent about, hey, here's how the industrial food system does it. We're doing some things differently. Here's what they are. So really educating customers around how we're taking very mindful steps to keep the product as clean and chemical free as possible. And then talking about the eating experience, connecting them to the farmer stories. So people, out of all the labels and certifications out there, the thing that trumps everything is being able to know your farmer. And so, we encourage customers everywhere to just, whenever possible, go direct to the farm. Go direct to the farmer. That's going to have the biggest impact out of anything you can do. You will learn a lot. You'll develop a relationship that could last forever, and it's it'll have a really meaningful impact on that farmer. And that's really what we're trying to do. We're owned by farmers, and we're connecting those farmers directly to customers. And then we educate on the environmental side, so things like how our practices improve the organic matter in the soil, and how that helps sequester more carbon, how that helps retain more water. And so, for instance, for every 1 percentage point of organic matter that you increase in an acre of soil, that acre of soil can hold an additional 20,000 gallons of water when it rains. And so, as we are facing more and more climate change issues, it's getting drier and drier across the country. It's that kind of thing is really important to helping us create a more resilient food system. So, it's really just trying to tackle all those things around animal welfare, health benefits, the environmental benefits, and then also the impact that we're having on these rural communities.
Yeah, I love that you finished on the impact on rural communities because it's something that I personally feel pretty strongly about, especially with some of the things I've been reading lately around kind of like mental health and
Yes.
how the farming community is actually like 3.5 times more likely to die from suicide than the general population.
Yes.
And that's just one small anecdote of
Yep.
how burdensome the system has made it to become a farmer,
Yep.
from carrying a ton of debt to doing work that is competing against multinational companies where the
That's
consumers have grown so distant from the food system that
Yep.
they don't know the difference between really high quality food and what they're getting
Yep.
versus something they can pick up at the grocery store. So I'd love for you to talk about that, rural revival, so to speak.
Yeah.
Do
Yeah.
you see that happening?
Yes, and I think that's if I were to sort of distill something, like there's a lot of things about this lifestyle and the work that we do that's very meaningful to me, but probably one of the things that's the most meaningful is the rural economic impact, the rural revival that you mentioned. That's something that I grew up in rural Arkansas. We live in one of the poorest parts of the country. We live in a county that's got, I think, the median income's like $25,000 or something like that. So it's very, very difficult to make a living here. And, in many ways, rural America tends to get left behind. It doesn't have, and this kind of farming is actually one of, the few ways that I can see to really create meaningful, deep economic impact in these rural communities. And so, for instance, we have, being part of a co-op. First of all, you already have a little bit of a community you wouldn't have otherwise. It's lonely being a farmer because you're usually isolated, and not having a community to support you is really difficult. And trying to go at it alone is really, really hard on farmers. And so it's really, one thing I strongly advocate for is you know, farmers creating peer groups of some kind, because you need to be able to talk to people, because you're right, suicide rates are really high. There's a lot of risk in this business, and it's fragile for an individual farm out there. And so when we between the farms that we support, and we actually have we have a partnership in a processing business that has, I think, around 170 employees. And we help that processing business, or in partnership with them, launched a poultry processing business. So there's just several businesses that have developed around our co-op here in a way that's driving, and they've or have grown because of it. And that's driving meaningful impact in one of the poorest parts of the country.
Mm.
And we have some farmers um, down in Mississippi that produce some pigs for us. That's, again, it's Arkansas, Mississippi are always sort of jockeying for the poorest and the bottom of the list when it comes to economic opportunities in this country. And so it's something that I'm definitely really proud of. And I think it's really important that we find ways to help create opportunities for these rural communities. And I think this is one that has a lot of legs, and is a story that we are very proud of here at Grassroots.
Yeah. Yeah. I really commend you and all the other farmers and co-ops who are really like swimming upstream, it feels like. And I'm sure you have experienced that obviously have experienced that firsthand, but just the level of impact that reinvesting in smaller communities can have,
Mhm.
and not outsourcing certain things to multinational companies, or the centralized system that really almost acts as a value in terms of just sucking out a lot of resources from talent that could be working on the farms, or whether
Yep.
it's money that would be circulating through those smaller economies. There's so many things that are moving away from these rural communities. So seeing small communities come together and be able to actually support each other, I think after COVID, that's one of the biggest takeaways that I have, is that we are designed to live in smaller, closer knit communities. And food is obviously a very critical part of the health and well-being of those small communities. So
Yes.
it gives me so much hope, and encourages me that there are people out there like yourself who are, fighting the good fight, and really just like putting their passion and purpose on the line every single day.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you saying that. And it's something that's definitely, we take that part real seriously. And there's um, it's you don't find a lot of young folks that want to live in rural America anymore. And that's because there's not opportunities. And so, we're finding that, we're like, I'm seeing farmers across the country who live in rural areas that are able to attract, if they're doing something innovative like we are, they're able to attract younger folks or keep talent in a community that, you have this sort of concept of the rural brain drain, where everybody just moves to the coast and the cities, and so and a lot of our customer base, frankly, is on the coast at this stage. And one of the things I love the most is seeing these customers on the coast buy this kind of meat, that then, and the money is coming back to these really rural communities in the middle of the country. And I think that's to me, I know we've got a lot of division in this country, especially between the urban and the rural. And in a small way, I think I love the idea of this connection between the rural communities that we're working in, and these more urban communities that are buying, their customers buying this product, and being able to have those customers and those farmers connect and support each other in ways that are really powerful. So yeah,
Yeah, big cities aren't going anywhere, but
yeah,
it's great seeing this raising of the awareness around where your food is coming from. And I'm curious to get your take on it. Did you see a shift in consumers' behavior and attitude towards food after COVID? Because I know people were worried for the first time ever that grocery stores weren't going to have food on the shelves. And it was really the first time that we were forced to question the existing paradigm around food, whether or not, you know, this conveyor belt that we've grown so accustomed to and gotten really comfortable with, of just food kind of just being there. Um,
yep.
it stopped for the first time. So we all kind of had to sit back and reconsider, hey, is large scale food really the best model here? Or should we be looking at resiliency as opposed to massive scaled up food that we're able to send all across the world?
Yeah, it's definitely started some conversations that weren't happening beforehand. I would say that there's definitely I think it's easy to go back to the cheap food,
Mm,
for a lot of folks, but I think that there's definitely conversations around, and you're seeing also like even the USDA make some investments in infrastructure that support a more decentralized food system than um, than was happening before, which is exciting around like meat processing, for instance. I mean, to give it one stat, I think it's maybe less than 20 poultry processing plants that will service independent farmers across the country. There are, I mean, maybe two or three west of the Rockies. And so there's basically like, I mean, to me, it just shows like how, like if you're a poultry farmer or you want to be a pasture poultry farmer in say the state of Washington, it is, you don't have an option to get USDA processing.
mm,
And so one of the big things coming out of COVID is the realization that we do need more processing plants. And I think that the key here is making sure that the consumer demand, and we keep educating consumers on the benefits of buying this way, so that as we build this infrastructure and get more farms off the ground, we're able to um, support those farms and have enough customer demand to be able to do that. So that's really where I see like that's what's going to drive the change over time, is just how much are the consumers going to demand this kind of product.
mm,
And that's the X factor in really changing the system, because that will drive everything over time. And I think that you're seeing more and more awareness and understanding of it. And I think that it'll be interesting to see where it goes over the next 10 years, because the past 10 years, a lot has changed. I mean, there's
mm,
so much more demand for this than when we started the co-op back in 2014. And it's going to be really interesting to see where this goes over the next 10 years.
mm. Yeah, one of the things I think about often is kind of just the socioeconomic component of this, where the education component is so huge, but there's also just the reality of the situation where food prices are going up. And I'd
Yeah.
be curious to just get your take on kind of just articulating and deconstructing food prices in general. Like, how do you articulate that to your customers?
Yeah. Yeah. So, one thing I'm an advocate for is eat less meat but better meat. So that's one sort of position that I have pretty strongly. I think we eat a lot of meat that is if you're eating like chicken nuggets in the shape of a dinosaur, I mean, like there's just like a lot of mindless meat consumption, I would say.
Totally.
Uh, and so, but better meat that's more nutrient dense, all for that. Less of it, yeah, I'm also okay with that too. Um, and then I also think that I mean, one thing. Then this is, if you look at the price of a Snickers bar per pound, I think it's around like $15 a pound. So to me, it is a matter of like if you look at grass-fed ground beef, maybe it's 10, 11, $12 a pound, depending on where you're getting it. And, so a Snickers bar, when you compare it nutritionally is going to be a lot less nutritionally dense than a pound of grass-fed beef. And so that's, I think some of it too is about prioritizing, what's
Mm.
important to you. And also, people getting better at cooking is something, like cooking, more cooking at home is something that was a big thing that happened during the pandemic. It's waned a bit for sure because restaurants are open. I love restaurants. Everybody loves restaurants, but there was just so much more cooking at home during that period. That was a really exciting thing to me, is to see that piece. But I think there's food is. Another thing that I think, another sort of perspective I have on this, that I believe it was in one of Michael Pollan's books. He gave a stat. I don't remember the exact numbers, but back in the 50s, we were paying about 18% of our income for food, and like 7% for healthcare. Right.
Mm.
Well, today we're doing just the opposite. We're paying 18%. Like, food is as cheap as we have the cheapest food in anywhere in the developed world, as a percent of income. But we're paying almost 18 or 20% of our income on healthcare. And
Right.
so that switch to me is just, we're basically going to a processed food diet, really cheap food, lots of, filled with lots of fillers, grain, sweetener, and then we're having to pay a big chunk of money for healthcare because of that. And to me, I would much rather pay more for food that tastes better and is healthier for me, than and pay less for healthcare. And so I think it's a matter of priorities, and also, like we've just created a lot of really easy, cheap food that is. I know it's gone up over the past, couple of years with inflation, but it's still cheap compared to the rest of the world, the developed world. And so much of it's empty calories that is not, is actually, is not good for you. And so, to me, those are kind of things I think of when I think about, the economics of food, and how, um, you know, like, is cheap meat really that cheap? I mean, it's cheap in some ways. Yeah, sure, it might be cheaper for, just on face value. But when you think about um, the the health impacts of it, the environmental impacts of it, this is what, going back to what I said early on in the conversation. I mean, we have a food system that prioritizes producing the cheapest possible meat or food out there. Just how, the cheaper the better. Nothing else really matters, right?
Mm.
And we want to take care of the environment. We want to make sure farmers and the food workers, the processing plant, can make a decent living doing this. We want to make sure that customers have a really, really nutrient dense, healthy product. We want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to mitigate climate change. So we're baking that into our system because we value that. And sure, our stuff costs more, but it's still, our grass-fed beef is still cheaper per pound than a Snickers bar. So
Mm. Yeah, I love that stat.
yeah,
Um,
it's pretty wild. I mean, every time I say, like, every couple of years I'll go back and look, and like it's still like, it's all price per ounce there. But
yeah,
it's and if it's not like they're like either right neck and neck, or grass-fed beef's a little bit cheaper. I don't think I've ever seen it where grass-fed beef is more expensive than a Snickers bar per pound.
yeah, yeah. It's highlights what you're talking about too, which is on a dollar per nutrient dense
Yes.
basis is really how we should be thinking about this.
Yeah.
Where if
Yep.
you're trying to fuel yourself for good health and avoid some of these negative health outcomes that come from eating highly processed foods, you
Yep.
should be investing on the front end, which obviously is maybe a little bit more painful, but on the back end, you're living a healthier life. You feel much better. You're able to invest your energy into things that are actually meaningful, as
Yep.
opposed to getting trapped up in this system that seems to like start with education, go into kind of different models of, how we create food, how we, just go about working. And
Yep.
then, on the back end of that is usually some pretty negative health outcomes. So
That's right. Yeah, and we spend a ton of money on like, medicine, health supplements. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't, take some health supplements. I think that's, um, but start with really, start your base should be a really healthy diet and,
Yeah,
and looking for foods that are nutrient dense and the way it's raised. And, like one thing we like to say is not just what you eat, but what you eat eats. That's important, right?
totally.
And so really like, I mean, we spend a lot of money on food and really taking that seriously and trying to educate yourself on, well, where can I get, what is going to be the most nutrient dense beef or pork or carrot out there? And so I think that's really one of the things that can help push more consumer adoption of this is the more there's a guy out there named, I think his name is Dan Kittredge. If you haven't heard of him, he'd be a great
Yep.
person to have on this podcast.
Yep.
But someone who's doing a lot of work to develop, I think he's working on like this little spectrometer that a customer could take in if they wanted to, and like do a little, carrot, like take a carrot and be able to measure its nutrient density. And to me, I think that's really, health benefits and be able for consumers to really see that nutrient density is going to be something that has a lot of power to drive more consumers to be looking this direction.
Mm. Yeah, we've talked a fair amount about the industrial system, and I'm curious, is there anything that stands out to you that you've learned about conventional ag that you were shocked to have heard about, whether it's like the amount of chemical usage or, how the processing facilities are run? Are there any things that stand out to you as just things that kind of just get glossed over as part of being normal parts of the conventional system that you're just like, this, people need to know about this?
Yeah, I think so a couple things. One is on the farmer side. I've if you I've read a couple of books about the poultry production model, not product like the structure that farmers are in the poultry system, where they're essentially like indentured servants, where I have friends whose parents are were poultry farmers, and so this is I'm getting this firsthand too, where they get these they find these farmers that don't have money, they have land, so they're land rich, cash poor,
Mm,
and then they help those farmers get access to capital to and sort of promise them a certain level of income, and they they get a group of farmers in a community together to go into debt to get chicken houses on their farm, and then the way they in so the farmers don't own they own the chicken house, but they don't own the chickens or the feed that the chickens are eating. All right. And so the way they incentivize these farmers to get good performance is they actually pit, though, say 10 farmers in the community against each other, where the farmer on top gets paid, they come out pretty good.
hmm,
The farmer on the bottom is barely eking by. All right. And so that system, that it's called a tournament system. And if you get a bad batch of chicks or you upset someone at the feed mill and they don't give you good feed, and there's been stories of that,
hmm,
you know, and or if you try to push back on your contract, like they try to keep you in debt too during that, so
hmm,
you don't have any leverage, right? And that system tears communities apart
hmm,
and takes a lot of folks and just it's just an absolute struggle to make a living doing that. Some farmers do okay, the ones at the top, but the ones that are, it's just it's a pretty divisive model, and that sort of indentured servitude around they're in debt their entire lives, as they I mean because as soon as you get to a place where you paid off the improvements you've made on your chicken house, they come back and, hey, here's a new round of improvements you got to make if you want us to re-up your contract.
right.
That's one thing that I is just such a it's extractive. It's just extracting the social capital, the resources from these rural communities in a way that is then driving and all the profits are going to the executives and the shareholders of these, these companies. So,
Yeah, it's hard for me to not think that there's some level of nefarious action behind that. It just seems like they're weaponizing financing to
they are,
ex-
yes. Yeah,
extract work and labor out of people who obviously they have the assets, they have the skill set, but they don't have the cash to get, to go buy the equipment and buy the animals. So
right. Yeah.
yeah, it's
And that's one reason why we're so committed to this, like cut out the middlemen, let the farmers and the customer like buy direct from the farmer. Like
yeah.
that's, so we have a very short supply chain. We're, the like, we own part of the processing plant. If our company makes profits, those go back to the farmers. We're actually looking at a model where how do we give profits and ownership to the processing employees that process the chickens or the beef that we send in. So we want to see a model where the is a really short supply chain. You cut out the middlemen. Customers are buying as direct from the farmer as possible, and then the profits of that business are going back to the farmers and the employees that are working in those food businesses. Uh,
Mm.
yeah. So
Do you think about the legacy financial model and just like how it is relatively easy to get debt as a, farmer and or access to capital isn't necessarily the biggest challenge, and that does impose certain limitations on how a farmer is going to operate their land, and the ability to actually be resilient during hard times is obviously encumbered by having debt on some of the assets that you own. So I'm curious, do you think that there's a model that we can start thinking about in the food system where we kind of think about the financing differently? Because I've
yes. So this is one direction we're also looking at down the road too. Is again, like cut out the middlemen. I think I would love to see consumers financing these businesses. So you take
Mm,
Organic Valley, all right? So they're a co-op of a farmer co-op, and they have gone out and they have offered what's called preferred stock. It's essentially like debt. It's non-voting stock, but it's a structure where they've been able to offer that to their customers to invest in that business. And so that's something that we see on the horizon is how do we get our customer stakeholders to invest in this business, invest in our farmers, so that and that just creates such a win-win outcome because the customers can get a return on that. It incentivizes them to keep buying from the grassroots and the supporting the farmers they've invested in. And that's something that I would love to see more and more of, is a way to go outside the traditional financing model and do something like that that is really going to create a more resilient versus extractive system there. Because this is, no one's going to get rich in the agricultural space. I mean, well, the people that do are typically, they're executives at Tyson, or they are, own, a huge, centralized processing company or whatever. But the reality is that we all, like, nothing happens without agriculture. If we don't have food, you can't make computers. You can't, make music. You can't like run a city. And so, we need to find ways, this extractive model that is trying to concentrate wealth and power at with a select few executives and shareholders is really something that I see as one of the underlying things that we're trying to like turn on its head through different creative ownership models where
mm,
actually the farmers own the business that's selling to the customer, and the processing employees own the business that's selling to the customers, and the financing of that entity is coming from the customers that are supporting that. So they're helping ensure that they have that supply of food, they have that resilient food system. So that to me is where I see creative financing and ownership models that really decouple like rich people having all the power in a company. Uh,
Mm,
and so anyway, that's definitely like something that's very, very important to us and top of mind. So
mm. How do you guys, how do you think about farm subsidies just and how it kind of plays into the bigger picture? Because clearly it steers a lot of the incentives within the industry and how people operate.
yeah, yeah. It's that's a great question. And I think there's a place for the government to help invest in the food system. All right. But I think you know ownership models and creative financing, those are something that clearly I've got some passion around. I also have some passion around getting money out of politics, because I think there's a lot of the subsidies go to subsidizing a food system that is going the wrong direction, in my opinion. And so I think I'm all for some sort of subsidies that help incentive, like so this funding that helped came out and supported the processing, the small independent processors. That's really powerful to rural communities. It's really important to building a more resilient, decentralized food system. But subsidies to support like the production of ethanol, of us to grow corn to then make ethanol out of, that's absolutely ridiculous and counterproductive to a long-term future for our country in our world. And so I think that ultimately it's like that's where our voting with your fork, electing politicians that really support a more regenerative agriculture model that's going to actually help fight the biggest challenges that our world has, like climate change, is super important. So
Mm. Yeah, it's great hearing you say that. I think, it's really easy to just get lost in kind of the just narrative around food and not really see the big picture of like who's driving a lot of these actions. And it typically is led by money, and the government should play a role in securing the food system and in some ways, promoting the right incentives. But I think from what I've seen, it seems like a lot of the incentives that are currently in place kind of really drive more of the negative outcomes that we're talking about in the conventional system.
yes, I definitely agree with you there, and I think that I'd love to see it like nudging, the food system in the right direction. I don't think it's nudging. It's not nudging hard enough in my in my opinion,
Yeah.
right? And really, I've increasingly lost faith in our political system, and where my faith is in the consumers to drive change here, and so I think um, that's really where where I get the most hope is consumers really wanting a different type of food system and
Mm,
helping educate, and that'll drive politicians to do different things too. But right now there's just such an entrenched lobbying effort, and such a powerful lobbying effort from the big ag side of things that that's a real uphill battle to fight that. There's some great organizations out there like NCAT is one of them, and there's just some different uh, groups that help support and advocate for the small farmer, for the decentralized food system. But that's a small it's a small voice in comparison to big ag.
mm. What's got you excited about what you guys are doing? What's on the horizon for you all over at Grassroots Co-op?
Yeah, so for us, I think that as I mentioned a little bit ago, we are looking at some more creative ownership structures that will help drive, ensure long term that the right, that we have farmer stakeholders, the food worker, the processing employee stakeholders have a stake in the outcome of this business. And so that's something that we're working to shore up over the next year. And then we are finding new ways to connect with our customers and potentially look at ways to raise, have those customers invest in Grassroots so we can
Mm,
expand what we're doing here. So those are a couple things that come to mind. And then, looking long term, we work, our base of farmers are largely around, Arkansas, Mississippi, Missouri, and Oklahoma. And our vision for the future is we would love, we have some partner farm groups that are in on the closer to the coasts, and so we would love to be part of helping develop a regional clusters of farms that could, and developing some of the things that we developed in our area, so processing infrastructure, a farmer network, that sort of co-marketing together, and help develop regional, other regions, versions of that in other regions of the country. And
mm.
so that's something that we have an eye towards too over the coming years. So
I love it. Yeah, I really love what you guys are doing, and think that your guys' messaging is just so core to our beliefs over here at the Meat Mafia, just trying to improve the food system from the grassroots up. And I really do believe that the consumers will end up really getting behind better quality food. But hopefully it's one of those things that doesn't take too long, because
yeah, we
yeah.
need it. We need it. The the world needs, folks to be buying from farmers that are raising animals in a way, or farming in a way. I mean, our farmers, like I said earlier, taking care of almost half of our country's land. We need to help push them and support them really in adopting practices that are going to really create more biodiversity, sequester carbon, retain more water, just become more resilient overall. And that's going to be something that's going to make us a lot healthier as a country and as a world, and also make our rural communities healthier, and help us fight climate change as it becomes more and more intense across the world. So
Mm. Well, Cody, I really appreciate you coming on today. I think our audience is going to absolutely love this episode and just take so much value out of everything that you said. So really appreciate your time. And for anyone listening, go check out Grassroots Co-op. They are doing all the right things. So Cody, appreciate you, and thank you so much for all the work that you're doing.
it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.